The first gunshot cracked through the dawn air like thunder, sending Sarah Owens diving from her horse to the dusty trail below. It was 1876, the height of summer in Montana Territory, and what had begun as a simple journey to Helena had just become something far more dangerous. Sarah had left her home in Missouri 3 weeks prior, determined to reach her uncle's ranch before autumn. At 23, she was no stranger to hardship. Her parents had died of typhoid 2 years before, leaving her to fend for herself. But the frontier demanded more grit than she had imagined. "Down! Stay down!" A deep voice commanded from somewhere behind her. Sarah pressed her cheek against the earth, heart hammering as hoofbeats approached. Dust clouded around her, and suddenly strong hands were pulling her into the brush alongside the trail. She found herself staring into the most startling blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a weathered face beneath a worn Stetson hat. "Bandits," the stranger whispered. "Fourth time this month they've hit travelers on this stretch." He peered through the foliage, rifle ready. "Name's Kieran O'Malley. You picked a bad day for traveling alone, miss." "Sarah Owens," she managed through dry lips. "And I didn't exactly invite them." A smile flickered across his face. "Fair enough." 3 more shots rang out, and Sarah's horse bolted with a terrified whinny, carrying her provisions and most of her worldly possessions with it. "Damn," Kieran muttered. "There goes your mount." His eyes narrowed as he scanned the ridge above. "Good news is, I think they're moving on. Probably just hoping for an easy mark. When they didn't drop you with that first shot, they lost interest." "My horse," Sarah lamented. "Everything I own was in those saddlebags." "We can track it later. My camp's not far. You'll be safe there while I scout around." He stood, offering his hand. "Can you ride double?" Sarah hesitated only briefly before taking his outstretched hand. His palm was calloused, but warm against hers. "I don't have much choice, do I? Not unless you fancy a long walk through bandit country." His smile was disarming, revealing a small dimple in his right cheek. Kieran's stallion, a magnificent black beast with intelligent eyes, stood patiently nearby. The cowboy mounted first, then pulled Sarah up behind him. She was acutely aware of the impropriety of wrapping her arms around a stranger's waist, but propriety seemed a distant concern compared to survival. "Hold tight," he instructed, and they set off at a brisk trot. His camp turned out to be a small clearing beside a creek, sheltered by cottonwood trees. A canvas tent, a small fire pit, and minimal provisions spoke of a man accustomed to traveling light. "It's not much," Kieran said as he helped her dismount, "but it's secure. Been working as a scout for the cattle drives between Montana and Wyoming. Just finished a job and heading back to my place near Bozeman." "You live alone?" Sarah asked, then blushed at the forwardness of her question. Kieran smiled. "Just me and about 60 head of cattle. Started my own spread 2 years ago." He began rekindling the morning's fire. "What brings you to these parts, Miss Owens?" "Not many women travel these trails alone." Sarah explained about her uncle's ranch and her hopes for a new beginning. As they talked, Kieran prepared coffee and shared his provisions, jerky and hardtack. Hardly a feast, but Sarah was grateful. "I'll see if I can find your horse," he offered. "But first, let me make sure those bandits aren't still lurking." While Kieran scouted, Sarah took inventory of her few remaining possessions: the clothes on her back, a small knife in her boot, and a locket containing her parents' portraits. Everything else, her money, clothes, and supplies, had disappeared with her horse. When Kieran returned hours later, his expression told her everything before he spoke. "Found your horse," he said grimly. "Bandits got to it first. They took everything, I'm afraid." Sarah's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. She'd endured worse, she told herself. "What now?" she asked, voice stronger than she felt. "We rest here tonight. Tomorrow, we head toward Bozeman. Your uncle's place is northeast of there, right? We can stop in town for supplies. Send word to him that you're coming. I'll see you safely there." Sarah wanted to refuse his charity, but knew she had no alternative. "Thank you, Mr. O'Malley." "Kieran," he corrected with a gentle smile. "Out here, formalities seem pretty pointless, don't they?" That night, Sarah slept in Kieran's tent while he kept watch by the fire. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully as she replayed the day's events and worried about the journey ahead. Dawn arrived with a clarity that belied Sarah's muddled thoughts. She emerged from the tent to find Kieran already breaking camp, his movements efficient and practiced. "Morning," he greeted. "How'd you sleep?" "Well enough," she lied, not wanting to seem ungrateful. "And you?" "I've had worse nights." He handed her a tin cup of coffee. "We should reach the next settlement by nightfall if we push hard." They set out as the sun crested the eastern mountains, Sarah again riding behind Kieran. The day grew increasingly warm, and by midday, the sun beat down mercilessly. Sarah's head began to pound, and a strange heaviness settled in her limbs. "Could we stop?" she asked, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. "Just for a moment." Kieran reined in his horse and turned to look at her. His eyes narrowed with concern. "You all right? You look flushed." "Just the heat," Sarah insisted, though she wasn't convinced herself. She'd felt unwell for days, attributing it to the rigors of travel, but now a familiar dread crept over her. The same fever that had taken her parents often began this way. By late afternoon, Sarah could barely stay upright. Her skin burned to the touch, yet she shivered violently. Kieran's worried voice seemed to come from far away. "Sarah, stay with me now." She felt his palm against her forehead, then heard him curse softly. "You're burning up. Why didn't you say something sooner?" "Didn't want to slow us down," she managed through chattering teeth. Kieran dismounted quickly and lifted her down. The world tilted alarmingly as he laid her in the shade of a large boulder. "River's just ahead," he said, his voice tight with concern. "We'll make camp there. You need rest and water." Sarah tried to nod, but found even that simple movement exhausting. Kieran disappeared briefly, returning with his canteen. He supported her head while she drank, the water blissfully cool against her parched throat. "Can you hold on a bit longer?" he asked. "I need to get you to the river." "I'll try," Sarah whispered, though she wasn't sure her legs would support her. Kieran studied her face, then made a decision. "No, you're too weak." Without warning, he swept her into his arms. "I'll carry you until your feet can walk again." The sudden movement made Sarah's head swim, and she instinctively wrapped her arms around his neck. "You can't carry me all that way. Watch me," Kieran replied with determined conviction. "You're hardly heavier than a saddle." He whistled for his horse, which followed dutifully as Kieran carried Sarah through the scrubland toward the sound of flowing water. The gentle rocking motion of his stride nearly lulled her to sleep, despite her discomfort. "Stay awake, Sarah," Kieran urged. "Talk to me. Tell me about your uncle's ranch." Sarah forced her eyes open, focusing on Kieran's steady heartbeat against her cheek. She described her uncle's letters about his property, the fertile valley, the herd of Herefords he was cultivating, the small but sturdy cabin he'd built with his own hands. "Sounds like a good place," Kieran commented, his breathing slightly labored from carrying her. "Your uncle married?" "Widowed," Sarah replied. "His wife died in childbirth their first year in Montana. The baby too. That's partly why he invited me to come. Says the place needs a woman's touch." "And you were willing to leave everything behind in Missouri?" "There was nothing left to leave," Sarah admitted. "After my parents died, I took work as a seamstress, but wages were poor, and the memories." She trailed off, overcome by a wave of dizziness. "We're almost there," Kieran assured her. "Just a little further." True to his word, the sound of rushing water grew louder, and soon they emerged onto the banks of a small river. Cottonwoods and willows lined the shore, offering welcome shade. With careful gentleness, Kieran laid Sarah on a patch of soft grass. "Rest here. I'll set up camp and get something cool for your head." Through fever-clouded eyes, Sarah watched as Kieran efficiently established their campsite. He worked with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to life outdoors, and despite her illness, she found herself admiring his capability. When the tent was pitched, Kieran soaked his bandana in the river and returned to place it on Sarah's forehead. The cool cloth was heavenly against her burning skin. "Thank you," she murmured. "Don't thank me yet," Kieran replied, his voice gruff with concern. "That fever's getting worse. I've seen trail fever before. It can turn dangerous fast." Sarah knew all too well how quickly fever could claim a life. "In my saddlebags," she said weakly, "I had willow bark and echinacea. My mother taught me." "Your saddlebags are gone," Kieran reminded her gently. "But I know a thing or two about trail medicine myself. Rest now. I'll take care of you." As darkness fell, Sarah's condition deteriorated. The fever raged, and coherent thought became increasingly difficult. She was vaguely aware of Kieran's constant presence, changing the cool cloth on her forehead, helping her sip water, speaking in low, soothing tones when delirious fears gripped her. In her fevered state, past and present blurred. Sometimes she thought she was back in Missouri, sitting beside her mother's sickbed. Other times, strange dreams took hold, dreams of bandits chasing her through endless canyons, or of her horse running away with everything she owned, growing smaller and smaller on the horizon until it disappeared entirely. Throughout it all, Kieran's voice anchored her to reality. "Stay with me, Sarah," he would say. "You're stronger than this fever. Fight it." On the second night, when the fever peaked, Sarah believed she was dying. "My locket," she gasped, clutching at Kieran's shirt. "If I don't make it, you'll make it," Kieran interrupted firmly. "I didn't carry you all this way to lose you now." His conviction gave her strength. When he pressed a bitter-tasting tea to her lips, she drank without complaint, trusting him completely though they'd met just days before. Dawn of the third day brought the first break in Sarah's fever. She awoke to find Kieran asleep beside the tent, his hand still holding a damp cloth he'd been using to cool her skin. In sleep, the hard lines of his face softened, revealing a vulnerability his waking demeanor concealed. Sarah studied him in the early light, the dark lashes resting against tanned cheeks, the stubble shadowing his jaw, the way one curl of brown hair fell across his forehead. Something tugged at her heart, a feeling both foreign and familiar. As if sensing her gaze, Kieran stirred and opened his eyes. Relief flooded his features when he saw her watching him. "Your eyes are clear," he observed, moving quickly to her side. He pressed his palm to her forehead. "Fever's broken. How do you feel?" "Weak," Sarah admitted. "But better." Kieran's smile transformed his face. "I knew you were tough, but I admit you had me worried for a spell." "How long was I ill?" 3 days. "The fever broke last night, finally." Sarah was stunned. 3 days? "You've been caring for me all that time." Kieran shrugged as if it were nothing. "Couldn't very well leave you to fend for yourself, could I? Besides, I meant what I said. I'll carry you until you can walk again." The simple sincerity in his words touched something deep within Sarah. No one had shown such care for her since her parents died. "Thank you," she whispered, unable to find words adequate for her gratitude. "You're welcome," Kieran replied, suddenly seeming almost shy. "Think you could manage some breakfast? You need to regain your strength." Over the next 2 days, Sarah gradually recovered her strength. Kieran proved to be not only a capable nurse, but also an engaging companion. He told stories of his life born in Boston to Irish immigrants, heading west at 18 to escape the confines of city life, working as a cowhand, scout, and eventually saving enough to buy his own land. "Never thought I'd settle in one place," he admitted as they sat by the fire on her 5th night of recovery. "But there's something about having your own piece of earth under your feet." "Is it lonely?" Sarah asked. "Living on your own?" Kieran poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. "Sometimes, especially in winter when the snow piles high and the nights are long." He glanced at her. "What about you? Will you stay with your uncle permanently?" Sarah hadn't considered beyond reaching her destination. "I don't know. I suppose it depends on whether I can be useful there. A woman who can survive bandits and trail fever?" Kieran smiled. "I'd say you've already proved your mettle." His compliment warmed her more than the fire. "Perhaps, but I'd like to build something of my own someday, not just live on someone else's charity." Kieran nodded thoughtfully. "That's a worthy ambition." By the 6th day, Sarah could walk short distances unassisted, though she tired quickly. Kieran suggested they remain camped by the river for another day before continuing to Bozeman. "No sense pushing too hard and risking a relapse," he said firmly when Sarah protested the delay. "Your uncle has waited this long. Another day won't matter." Sarah relented, secretly grateful for the reprieve. Each day in Kieran's company revealed new facets of his character that she found increasingly admirable: his patience, his quiet strength, his unexpected gentleness with both her and his horse. That evening, as they sat side by side watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Sarah gathered her courage to ask the question that had been on her mind. "Kieran, why are you doing all this? You could have left me at the first settlement we passed." He was silent for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his His voice was soft with an emotion she couldn't quite identify. When I first came west, I was robbed and beaten not far from here. Left for dead on the trail. He touched a small scar above his right eyebrow. An old trapper found me, nursed me back to health. Never asked for payment, just said to help the next person I found in trouble. Kieran turned to look at her directly. But truth be told, I'd have helped you anyway, Sarah Owens. The intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. Why? Kieran reached out slowly, hesitantly, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek. Because from the moment you faced down those bandits without flinching, I knew you were someone worth knowing. Sarah's heart raced at his touch. She'd never been courted, had always been too busy helping her parents, and then surviving on her own to consider romance. But sitting beside Kieran in the fading light, she felt possibilities opening before her that she'd never imagined. I'm glad it was you who found me on the trail, she whispered. So am I, Kieran replied, his smile soft in the gathering dusk. The next morning, they broke camp early. Sarah insisted she was strong enough to ride on her own, though Kieran kept a watchful eye on her throughout the day. By sundown, they reached the outskirts of Bozeman. The town was larger than Sarah had expected, a proper settlement with wooden boardwalks, a church steeple rising above the buildings, and the bustle of commerce everywhere. After weeks on the trail, the sight of civilization was both welcome and strangely intimidating. Kieran guided them to a modest hotel on the main street. Wait here, he instructed, helping her dismount. I'll see about rooms. Sarah stood awkwardly beside his horse, acutely aware of her trail-worn appearance. Her dress was dusty and wrinkled, her hair a tangled mess beneath her bonnet. Beside her, a pair of well-dressed women passed by, giving her curious glances. Kieran returned looking pleased. Got you a room with a proper bath, he announced. And there's a general store still open where we can get you some necessities. Kieran, I have no money, Sarah reminded him, embarrassed by her dependency. Consider it a loan, he replied easily. You can repay me once you're settled at your uncle's. Before she could argue further, he ushered her into the hotel. The room was simple but clean, with a real bed that looked like heaven after days of sleeping on the ground. The bath will be brought up shortly, Kieran said, lingering in the doorway. I'll fetch some supplies and be back in an hour. Will you be all right? Sarah nodded, suddenly shy in the confines of the small room. Yes, thank you. After Kieran left, a hotel maid brought up a copper tub and buckets of steaming water. The bath was glorious, Sarah's first proper washing in weeks. She scrubbed away the grime of travel, washed her hair, and felt human again. With only her travel-worn dress to put back on, she was just finishing braiding her damp hair when a knock came at the door. Kieran stood there with several packages and a shy smile. Wasn't sure of your size, he admitted, handing her the largest package. The shopkeeper's wife helped me guess. Inside was a simple but well-made blue calico dress. The smaller packages contained other essentials: a hairbrush, soap, stockings, even a modest nightgown. Sarah was overwhelmed by his thoughtfulness. This is too much, she protested. It's nothing fancy, Kieran replied with a shrug. Just what you need to get by until you reach your uncle's. Sarah clutched the dress to her chest. Thank you. I don't know how I'll ever repay such kindness. You already have, Kieran said softly. Just by fighting to stay alive when that fever had you in its grip. He cleared his throat. I've arranged for supper to be brought up. You should rest afterward. Tomorrow, we'll send word to your uncle and plan the last leg of your journey. After a proper meal and a night in a real bed, Sarah felt remarkably restored. She put on the new dress, appreciating how closely Kieran had guessed her size, and went downstairs to find him waiting in the hotel lobby. You look, he began, then seemed at a loss for words. Better than a half-dead woman on the trail? Sarah suggested with a smile. Kieran laughed. I was going to say beautiful, but yes, that too. His compliment brought a blush to her cheeks. What's our plan for today? I've already sent a telegram to the nearest station to your uncle's ranch. With luck, he'll get word within a day or two that you're safe and in Bozeman. Kieran gestured toward the door. In the meantime, I thought you might like to see the town. If you're feeling up to it. Sarah nodded eagerly. After weeks of wilderness, the prospect of civilization, even a frontier town like Bozeman, was appealing. They spent the day exploring the settlement. Kieran showed her the livery stable where he'd boarded his horse, the mercantile where ranchers and settlers purchased supplies, and the small church that served the growing community. They stopped for lunch at a modest cafe, where Sarah savored her first fresh-baked bread in weeks. "Your ranch is near here?" she asked as they walked along the boardwalk afterward. "About half a day's ride southwest," Kieran confirmed. "It's not much compared to some spreads, but the valley has good water and grazing. You sound proud of it." "I am." His expression softened. "Building something from nothing, there's satisfaction in that, isn't there?" Sarah thought of her plans to help her uncle, to perhaps establish a life of her own in this wild territory. "Yes, there is." By late afternoon, they returned to the hotel to find a telegram waiting. Kieran read it with a frown that deepened as he scanned the message. "What is it?" Sarah asked, anxiety rising. "It's from the station master near your uncle's ranch." Kieran handed her the telegram. "I'm afraid it's not good news." Sarah read the brief message with growing dismay. "Regret to inform Miss Owens, stop Nathan Owens deceased 3 weeks ago, stop pneumonia, stop ranch being sold for taxes, stop." The paper trembled in her hands. "He's gone," she whispered. "I'm too late." Kieran guided her to a chair in the hotel lobby. "I'm so sorry, Sarah." Reality crashed down around her. Her uncle, her last living relative, and her hope for a new beginning was dead. The ranch she'd traveled so far to reach no longer awaited her. She was alone in a strange territory with no home, no prospects, and no means to support herself. "What will I do now?" The question escaped before she could stop it, vulnerability naked in her voice. Kieran knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "You have options," he said firmly. "Bozeman's growing. There's need for skilled women. You mentioned you worked as a seamstress. Or—" he hesitated, then continued with determination. "Or you could come to my ranch. Not as charity," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "As a partner." Sarah stared at him, uncertain she'd heard correctly. "A partner." Kieran's gaze was steady, though a flush crept up his neck. "I know it's sudden. We've known each other barely 2 weeks. But in that time, I've seen your courage, your resilience, your kindness. Those qualities are rare out here." He took a deep breath. "I'm not proposing marriage, not yet. That would be too forward. But I am offering you a place. A home, if you want it. Time to decide if we might suit." Sarah's mind raced. The proper response would be to refuse such an unconventional arrangement. But propriety seemed a luxury she could ill afford. And the truth was, the thought of parting from Kieran filled her with an unexpected sense of loss. "People would talk," she said, testing his resolve. "Let them." Kieran smiled slightly. "My nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. Besides, we could tell them you're my cousin. Come to help with the house, until we decide if there's more between us worth pursuing." His pragmatism surprised a laugh from her. "You've thought this through." "Not until I read that telegram," Kieran admitted. "But once I did, I knew I couldn't bear to see you struggle alone when I have the means to help." His expression grew serious. "I carried you when you couldn't walk, Sarah. I'd like to stand beside you now that you can." The sincerity in his blue eyes melted the last of her hesitation. In the short time they'd known each other, Kieran O'Malley had proved himself honorable in ways few men had. And though she barely wanted to admit it to herself, her feelings for him had grown far beyond mere gratitude. "All right," she said finally. "I accept your offer. As partners." The relief and joy that transformed Kieran's face told Sarah more about his feelings than words could have. He raised her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "You won't regret it," he promised. They left Bozeman the following morning, Sarah riding a gentle mare Kieran purchased for her. The journey to his ranch took them through rolling grasslands dotted with wildflowers, past clear streams, and into a verdant valley sheltered by distant mountains. When they crested the final hill, Sarah gasped at the view. Below them lay a modest but well-built cabin beside a small creek. Nearby stood a barn, corrals, and grazing pastures where cattle browsed lazily in the afternoon sun. Beyond stretched meadows of grass swaying in the breeze. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. Kieran's expression was a mix of pride and uncertainty. "It's not much compared to some places, but it's perfect," Sarah interrupted. Truly, his smile was worth every hardship she'd endured to reach this moment. The cabin was rustic but sturdier than Sarah had expected, with 2 rooms, a main living area with a stone fireplace and kitchen space, and a smaller bedroom. Kieran had built it with care, the craftsmanship evident in every joint and beam. "I'll sleep in the barn until we sort things out," he said as he showed her around. "The bedroom's yours." "You don't have to do that," Sarah protested. "I can make a pallet by the fire." "Wouldn't be proper," Kieran insisted. "Besides, I've spent more nights under the stars than under a roof. The barn's downright luxurious compared to some places I've bedded down." That first evening, as they sat on the cabin's small porch watching the sunset paint the valley gold, Sarah felt a contentment she hadn't known since before her parents' deaths. Beside her, Kieran pointed out landmarks and shared his plans for expanding the herd come spring. "The south pasture needs fencing," he was saying, but once that's done, he stopped abruptly, looking chagrined. "I'm boring you with ranch talk." "Not at all," Sarah assured him. "If I'm to be your partner, I should understand the operation." Kieran studied her face in the fading light. "You really mean that, don't you? About being a partner here?" "I do." Sarah's certainty surprised even herself. "I've spent too long depending on others' charity. I want to build something of my own, or help build something alongside someone who values my contribution." "I value you," Kieran said softly, "more than I can say." The weeks that followed established a rhythm to their days. Sarah took charge of the cabin, creating a comfortable home from Kieran's bachelor quarters. She planted a vegetable garden, began raising chickens, and even fashioned curtains for the windows from fabric purchased on their monthly trips to town. Kieran taught her about the cattle, how to ride the boundaries of their land, and basic skills needed for ranch life. She proved an apt pupil, her determination compensating for her lack of experience. They told neighbors and townspeople that Sarah was Kieran's distant cousin from back east, come to help with domestic matters on the ranch. If anyone suspected otherwise, they kept their thoughts to themselves. In frontier Montana, people respected privacy and practicality above conventional propriety. As summer faded into autumn, Sarah and Kieran's relationship deepened beyond partnership into something neither had expected to find. Their first kiss came on a crisp September evening as they returned from checking fences on the north boundary. Kieran helped Sarah dismount, but instead of stepping back, he kept his hands at her waist, his expression suddenly serious. "Sarah," he said, her name almost a question. She looked up at him, at the face that had become dearer to her than any other, and knew exactly what he was asking. Rising on tiptoe, she pressed her lips to his in answer. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but quickly deepened with months of unspoken longing. When they finally parted, both breathless, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since Bozeman," he admitted. Sarah smiled. "What took you so long, Cowboy?" His laugh was joyous and unrestrained. "Giving you time. Making sure you weren't just grateful to the man who carried you off that trail." "I am grateful," Sarah said, touching his cheek. "But that's not why I'm here. And it's not why I just kissed you." "Why are you here, then?" Kieran asked, his arms still around her waist. "Because somewhere between that first gunshot and this moment, I fell in love with you." Kieran's expression transformed with wonder. "Say that again." "I love you, Kieran O'Malley." He kissed her again, pouring every emotion into the embrace. "And I love you, Sarah Owens. Have since I carried you to that riverbank, fever and all." They were married on the first snowfall of winter, a simple ceremony in Bozeman's small church with neighbors and a few townspeople as witnesses. Sarah wore a dress of deep blue wool that Kieran insisted on buying despite her protests about the expense. "My wife should have something fine for our wedding day," he'd said with that stubborn set to his jaw that she'd come to both exasperate and adore. They spent their wedding night in the cabin that was now truly their home, the bedroom no longer just Sarah's domain. Outside, snow blanketed their land in pristine white, while inside, the fire crackled warmly as they discovered the intimate side of marriage with equal parts passion and tenderness. As they lay together afterward, Sarah rested her head on Kieran's chest, listening to the strong, steady beat of his heart. "Happy?" he asked, stroking her hair. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. "When I set out for Montana, I never imagined finding this." "Finding what?" Sarah lifted her head to look into his eyes. "A man who would carry me when I couldn't walk. A partner who would stand beside me when I could. A love I never knew I was seeking until I found it." Kieran pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. That day on the trail when those bandits shot at you was the luckiest day of my life. Even though you had to nurse me through fever for days? Sarah teased. Especially because of that, Kieran said seriously. It showed me who you really were, your strength, your determination. I fell in love with the woman who fought that fever, not just the pretty girl I pulled into the brush. Outside, the snow continued to fall, insulating their small cabin against the Montana winter. But inside, wrapped in each other's arms, Sarah and Kieran had created a warmth that would sustain them through many seasons to come, a love born on a dangerous trail and nurtured through adversity into something enduring and true. In the years that followed, the O'Malley ranch prospered under their joint care. They added rooms to the cabin as their family grew, first a son with Kieran's blue eyes and Sarah's determination, then twin daughters who brought laughter and chaos in equal measure. The cattle herd expanded, and their reputation for fair dealing and quality stock spread throughout the territory. On the 10th anniversary of their meeting, Kieran surprised Sarah with a locket to replace the one she'd lost, a gold heart containing miniature portraits of their children on one side and a tiny pressed wildflower on the other. From the riverbank where I nursed you back to health, he explained when she questioned the flower. Sarah wore it always, a reminder of how their journey together had begun with a fever on the trail and a cowboy's promise to carry her until her feet could walk again. A promise that, in all the ways that mattered, Kieran had kept faithfully through the years of their shared life. And in the quiet moments, when their children were asleep and the day's work done, they would sometimes sit on the porch of their home, hands clasped, and marvel at how a chance encounter on a dangerous Montana trail had led them to the greatest fortune either could imagine, a love that had carried them through every challenge, stronger with each passing season.